motivation. Okay. All right, so welcome to our first teaching for the new year. And it's on the 3 Principles of the Path by Lama Tsong Khapa. And if you have the gold book, we're following the one in the gold book because that's the copy everyone has. It's on page 143. This teaching, so it's the 3 Principles of the Path, we'll go through over the next 3 weeks, and it sits in the training of the path of the middle capable of being, seeking liberation. Of course, it is in the genre of the Lam Rim, the graduated path to enlightenment, and it's one of the concise presentations by Lama Tsong Khapa in relation to that. So that in terms of the training of in the path of the middle capable being, we look at, well, the main practice of that is the Four Noble Truths. So first of all, we look at actually establishing the nature of the path, the type of physical rebirth that will stop samsara, the type of path that will stop, physical rebirth that will stop samsara, the type of path that will stop samsara, and the 3 higher trainings in moral ethics, concentration, and the training in wisdom. So the first of these principles, the first one being of renunciation, and given that all of Lama Tsong Khapa's treatises on the Lam Rim, the great treatise on the path to enlightenment, the 3 volumes we studied, the middling Lam Rim and the concise Lam Rims, foundation of all good qualities, the 3 principles of path, the song of experience. So all of these are on the foundation of the Lam Rim foundation as taught by Lama Atisha in the Lamp on the Path to Enlightenment. And there in the 4th verse it says, those who seek peace for themselves alone, in other words, seeking self-liberation, turning away from worldly pleasures and avoiding destructive actions are said to be of middling capacity. So this is, as I said, the teachings then on the 4 Noble Truths. So we will unpack all of this. So turning away from worldly pleasures that, in our Buddhist teachings, even things that we conventionally regard as pleasurable because they're based on the sensory engagement of our senses, then they're ultimately all in the nature of dukkha, which is that dissatisfaction. In other words, the nature of dissatisfaction, you're never getting what you want, getting what you don't want, and so forth. The nature of suffering. So the Buddha in the 4 Noble Truths explains the path that transcends that suffering. And that refers not just to the painful experiences that we, of course, don't want to have, nobody wants that, but also the pleasurable ones. So you could say that part is not unique to Buddhism, but it's common and was certainly common at the time of the Buddha to both Buddhist and non-Buddhist schools in India. And we can tell by looking at some of the non-Buddhist traditions, particularly within the Hindu traditions, aimed at cultivating the 4 levels of concentration. So the form and formless realms. And the 4th level, or dhyana, of concentration. So just by way of context, the entrance to the 1st jhana, the 1st level of concentration, is the achievement of shamatha, of calm abiding, of being able to place your mind on whatever object you want and not be disturbed, and to hold your mind there in laser-like concentration for as long as you want without distraction. Right. So that's the entrance to the first level. The fourth level is a state where it's said, if we're talking about formless realm, that the experience of pain and pleasure are no longer exist for the meditator. And so then those four levels of the formless realm, absorptions, so absorptions of the formless realm are beyond any pain or pleasure. So what's unique to Buddhism is that the very condition, which we call the ignorance of self-grasping, the very condition upon which these experiences arise in the sort of exquisite meditative absorption of the form and formless realms, are also in the nature of suffering. And what we look at in particular in identifying, to identify, is the pervasive suffering of conditionality, of coming into existence because of having a body, but in particular a mind, even if you don't have the body, of pervaded by this ignorance that gets everything wrong. That's out of sync with reality. That makes mistakes, that over elaborates, that puts on top of what's there and what's not there. So this pervasive compounded suffering, pervasive in that it pervades our mind whilst ever we're in samsara, no matter where we're born within samsara. It's at the very root of samsara. So that has to be thoroughly understood and thoroughly abandoned. We all get the suffering of suffering. Even animals get that. We all make adjustments accordingly. That's a very manifest level. Suffering of change we also get, but we don't recognize when we're that no matter what, every single moment is pervaded by being in the nature of a samsaric existence, whilst ever we're in samsara. And then, as it says in those 4 lines, turning away from worldly pleasures, okay, we talked about that, and avoiding destructive actions. And here I come back to the fact that the very first dialogue conference that His Holiness the Dalai Lama had with, the Mind and Life Institute in the early 80s was precisely on destructive emotions that could then propel this destructive action. So the destructive actions are all those karmic formations, if we look at the 12 links, or the karmic actions that perpetuate this cycle of conditioned existence. And so a practitioner of the middling scope is going to generate that general aspiration to be free of that, right? And, engaging in a path that undercuts that whole process, say, of the causal nexus of ignorance, in other words, the 12 links. So here we had that in the Heart Sutra, it's aging and death, ignorance and, what do we say? There is no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death, etc. No ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on. Clearly, no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death is the 12 links. And then the next part is the 4 truths. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. So that's the 4 truths, or the 4 noble truths, 4 truths that are self-evident. They're truths for Arya beings who have a direct perceptual realization of emptiness. It's obvious, in other words. So this is all, as we know, the first teaching the Buddha gave. So it's common to all schools of Buddhism. It's a common practice our motivation in a Mahayana context will be different, but the practices, like our understanding, having to identify what suffering is, and particularly at this very most subtle level, this pervasive level, and the subsequent suffering come from that. So the idea of these practices being common is also they're like preparatory or preliminary stages for us as a Mahayana practitioner. Because you might say, oh, I'm not middling scope, I'm great scope. But actually, even when we look at the three principles of path, it from that context goes over the small scope, right? So it covers the whole Lam Rim. So when we cultivate the recognition that the emotional disturbances, destructive emotions, mental afflictions are the true enemy, are our true enemy. When we realize the enemy's inside, not outside, I mean, even knowing it, we still point the finger outside. How much do we do that and how much do we do this, right? But that underlying them is that mental ignorance, that self-grasping, that innate, as we say, self-grasping. It's innate because it propels us into cyclic existence. We're born with it. What hope? It's not we're born with it because we're bad people. It's born with it because we're confused about reality. So once we recognize that, we go about engaging in methods to eliminate that ignorance. Well, recognize that as long as we're under control of even the slightest manifestation of affliction, we're never going to be free of this dissatisfaction, this dukkha, suffering existence, right? And then on top of that, we have to generate a genuine wish, a deeply felt aspiration for liberation, for renunciation, for definite emergence from this bondage. So that's the true renunciation. And this is the practice unique to the Buddhist path. So then looking at the actual text, which is, I said, on page 143 in this gold book. Well, actually, before we get to the actual text, the first thing to consider is, well, when we talk about path, what is meant by path? And of course, we know what a path is. You know, a path takes you from A to B. It might be a track, it might be a road, it might be a railway line, a tram line, whatever. It's something which gets you from A to B. But here we're not talking worldly, we're talking about a spiritual path, which we can say in terms of the Lam Rim, graduated path, steps on the path to enlightenment, or as Lama Atisha's take, the lamp on the path to enlightenment, illuminating the path. So we're traveling through various stages based on oral instructions of past great masters such as Lama Tsong Khapa, and we take those instructions to heart and then put them into practice. So we move through these various stages at the evolution of the path. So the path also, as we were looking at last year, we talk about the basis, the path, and the result. And in that way, the path is the mind states that we're generating. We can say the path of realizations is the realizations that we generate in our mind. So what mind starts becomes a path mind. Okay. And then we have principle. So in some translations, it's, as we have here, the three principles of the path. In others, and I think this is actually more accurate, less confusing, three principal aspects of the path, the three principal things, key things to practice. Because principles in English can also be, I lead a principled life. And indeed, one needs to do that. There's no question about that. but we use the word differently. So it's with that principle as in the main one. In this case, the main three, the essence of the Lamrim, the graduated path to enlightenment. Okay. So when we talk about this as the principles of the path, we're talking about a person of the small scope, of the middle scope, even though this is geared towards the middle scope practices, and of the great scope. And so particularly when we're looking at renunciation, and then the great scope, we bring in bodhichitta and then correct view. In some presentations of the Lamrim, the correct view comes and then bodhichitta, but we follow Lama Atisha's original text and Lama Tsong Khapa's elaboration of that and clarification of that, and we end up with the order that we have: renunciation, bodhichitta, and correct view. So they're the three principal aspects of the path. So this particular text that Lama Tsong Khapa composed, actually composed is wrote down, shall we say, in that way, composed, but it actually came from a pure vision where he received this teaching directly from the Buddha Manjushri. So in that way, it's a heart essence of his own practice, as indeed, the songs of experience. If you hear songs like the songs of Milarepa, Song of Experience, Lama Tsong Khapa, and he says that, I, a yogi, practice in this way, you who seek liberation should do likewise. So it's coming from his own practice. So this particular teaching was in response to a request to Lama Tsong Khapa by one of his disciples who lived on the Chinese-Tibetan border, a place called Gamarang. And the monk requested him to give him some inspiring words for his practice. So then Lama Tsong Khapa composed this text for that monk based on the teachings he had received directly from the Buddha Manjushri. So in here we have, we'll go back to the introductory verses, but in terms of this principle of renunciation, these are covered in verse 3, 4, and 5. And verse 3, we'll come back to these. So, yeah. The verse 3 presented, well, why do we need to generate renunciation? What's the purpose of that? And this is how it's structured throughout with the other two principles as well. So verse 3 is what's the point? Verse 4 is how to generate that mind of renunciation. And verse 5 is, how do I know when I've done that? So it's a definition of having done that, right? So how do I know I've been successful? But let's go back to the word renunciation. So, of course, we all know renunciation doesn't mean giving away all your worldly possessions, although declutter is good. I have a friend who's contemplating, not in a rush, but contemplating moving into aged care. And she has got a few years. She hasn't put her name down yet. She knows where she wants to go, but she hasn't put her name down, which is probably just as well. It's like, so she's been chipping away at the stuff, which is good for the mind. Even you never get through it, it's good for the mind. My mother at the end of her life was doing a similar thing, and it's even though you sort of knew she wasn't going to complete it, it's still good for the mind, right? Yes, Venerable Thubten.
One of the ladies I was speaking to yesterday, she finally moved to a couple of years ago from Sydney, and they had they brought 2 shipping containers over. She could not bear to part with her son's toys.
Oh, sorry.
So she just
Yeah.
yeah. going to run into difficulty in a couple of years.
Okay, Lee, Venerable Peiko was mentioning someone she had a conversation with who moved here from Sydney a few years ago. And the stuff they brought or are planning to bring, I'm not sure, 2 shipping containers full, because she couldn't bear to part with the toys her kids had had when they were young. There are toy libraries. Yeah, anyway, we all have our things that we hold on to, but in reality, what are we taking with us? Just this. And even that we're not taking with us. So anyway, so it's not about giving away all your stuff. It's a mind state, right? So we have these 3 verses that relate to that. So just the very word renunciation in Tibetan is Nyengjung, and Nyen from Nyepa means definite, and Jung from Jungwa means obtaining or emerging. So we generally say definite emergence, or that aspiration to definitely emerge from cyclic existence. In other words, at that point, you have absolutely no doubt whatsoever. So here in the by Vajradhara Losang Jingpa, Lama Tsong Khapa Rinpoche put together a glance meditation, all the important points of the Lam Rim. If you're familiar with the retreat book, it's at the beginning there. And it says in this part, not having abandoned afflictions. So when we're talking about renunciation, not having abandoned afflictions, I have to experience uninterrupted, limitless cyclic existence. By contemplating well how cyclic existence works, may I train day and night in the principal aspect of the 3 precious higher trainings, the means of attaining liberation. Okay, so definite emergence. Lama Zopa Rinpoche said I think this was the first Lamp of the Path retreat. Did you go to the first one, Leslie? I'm always asking you. Okay, yeah, no, that wasn't the first one. This was 2009. I'm pretty sure that was the first one. So this was in North Carolina. Rinpoche was teaching on the Lamp of the Path to Enlightenment, but he only ever one time opened the text and closed it again. And said we probably need to keep going. Yeah. So, but at that, one thing that Rinpoche said, renunciation of delusions, in particular attachment. Attachment, why in particular attachment? Well, we're attached to existing. We're attached to having a body, right? And then, and then the right view, realizing emptiness, which eliminates the ignorant mind. And then bodhichitta, which eliminates the self-cherishing thought. So that's the traditional presentation. We need these realizations and to actualize the generation and completion state. So right there is the whole sutra and tantric path. And so the first 2 stages are taught under renunciation. So this is unique to this, a unique feature of this work. And this is from a commentary by Pabonka Rinpoche on the principal teachings of Buddhism by Lama Tsong Khapa. Renunciation is the one special cause that brings what we call great compassion, right? It brings that great compassion. But to get to that, we have to first find the true thoughts of renunciations for ourselves. And Arya Shantideva said in the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, if people like these have never before, even in the dreams they dream, felt such a wish just for themselves, a wish for nirvana, perfect peace, liberation, freedom from the afflictions, we've never even conceived that it's possible for ourselves, then how can we come to have that for others? So it's absolutely vital in that way that we have that. Thus, it goes on, we can say that renunciation and compassion are the same state of mind, just that one is developed meditating on your own situation and the other meditating on others' situation. To develop this compassion, we must undertake to study and contemplate the paths, the steps on the path to Buddhahood that gentle protector Lama Tsong Khapa taught, and gradually train our minds. And then Lama Tsong Khapa, the commentary goes on, people like you and I see our feelings of desire and our other mental afflictions grow stronger day by day if we observe. True? Well, we check our minds, it'll tell you. We're training our mind to go the other way. Up and down, depending on, or dependent the latest U-boot we see somewhere or whatever. As we're wandering through the shopping centre, working on our attachment and not buying anything. How's that going for you? The problem is we have not been able to train our minds in the path of the lesser and medium scopes of practice. So yes, we have the Mahayana motivation. We have that great big motivation for the benefit of others. But, the training, we have to establish the training. And as Tenzin Palmo, Jetsuma Tenzin Palmo says, most people feel cozy enough in samsara, cozy enough. Now, we can say that today. Yesterday, you might have debated that one. Here, it was 41, got up to 41 apparently yesterday. Yeah, it was warm, hot, in other words. Most people feel cozy enough in samsara. Now, we're not talking about necessarily Dharma practitioners here, that most people are like, well, they're building their bigger home, getting their more comfortable beds and comfortable this and comfortable that. They do not really have a genuine aspiration to go beyond that. Why would you? I feel cozy. They just want samsara to be a little bit better or a lot better. That's right. Yeah. They just want to make what is better in a conventional world. It's, and then, we think about samsara, the perfume, which I've mentioned before, someone gave that to me once for Christmas, not after I ordained, because, we don't wear perfumes. But there was no way in the world I could even put on a perfume called samsara, just like I've got enough samsara as it is. I don't want to put any more on my body. But it's interesting, isn't it? It's sort of, it seduces us into thinking, oh, samsara, that's nice. It smells pleasant. It's a good thing. Just like, I don't know if they still have these ones anyway, obsession, addiction. These are perfumes. Opium, poisons, and other perfume. We are very strange beings. I can't see the attraction of calling these things this. Anyway, I think Chanel number 5 was a rather neutral title. There's something seductive about addiction, opium, not the real thing. You're not taking the real thing, but there's something naughty but nice. It's very funny. I don't know. No idea. Yeah. So the point is that the underlying motivation to go beyond samsara is extremely rare in the world generally. We can conclude that very easy. But even for us who come to Dharma centers, the genuine motivation to go beyond that. Now, I look around and go, well, I can't say you peeps because we're here. But, there's a lot of people who learn to meditate, but with an underlying motivation that they hope to make themselves feel better. Like for years, my Friday morning at Vajrayana Institute, which I really dearly looked forward to, was leading meditation on Friday morning. And then we sat around and had cuppa and chats, just like happens here on afterwards, for an hour longer than the actual meditations. But it was wonderful. And, people would say, oh, that meditation was so wonderful. And I thought, oh no, it's failure. Is it? Like, because it felt so good. Should it feel so good? It's very difficult with a drop-in meditation because you want people to keep coming back. And if the feel-good factor is what keeps them coming back, not that you're intending for them just to feel good.
It's feeling bad.
Yeah, well, let's hope that feel-good meant they had more spacious mind, more peace of mind, rather than good in a beneficial way. Yeah. But there is that attitude of, in the world generally, I'm not saying even in a Dharma center, of meditation will help you feel better. When you look at those lists, I'm sure there's a lot of New Year's lists, what to do. I could write every single article we all could, because it's the same 5 points. What are they? Exercise, sleep, meditation, diet. What's the other one? Maybe dehydration. Not dehydration, the opposite, hydration. And anyway, it's always the same ones. It's just like nobody's come up with some new one. It's good that meditation's part of that. They recognize that, is good for physical, mental well-being, and indeed it is. But if it ends up making them feel worse because they might instead of realizing that's a good sign because you're touching something, then they think there's something wrong with the Dharma. Like, I've heard people say, oh, when we got onto that topic, that was it for me. I was out of here. It happens. It happens. What can we say? So let's face it, we're all trying to make ourselves feel more comfortable in the prison house of samsara, as Lama Zopa Rinpoche, sort of would quote to us in Liberation Prison Project. At least those who are in the physical prison know they're in a physical prison. Those who are in the mental prison, which is all of us, aren't aware of that, right? So it's sort of, we want to make ourselves a little bit more comfortable here, like we have in our Guru Puja. So here we are in the prison cell, and Tenzin Palmo uses this example. Now, we might think that if we get the cell wall painted a pretty shade of pale green and put in a few pictures, it won't be a prison anymore. And indeed, I remember visiting this guy who was in the forensic unit, and he was in a single cell. I mean, he was, one up, like he was on his own, because when you're in the forensic unit for mental health issues, you're pretty much on your own. And the wall was white, and his exercise area was teeny tiny, and it had that very thick, hard wire that you couldn't, they just had these, light came through, but you couldn't see out. It's that sort of thing. So my immediate response was, oh, we have to put pictures on your wall of mountains and skies and this and that. I mean, that was reality. But as Jetsuman Tenzin Palmo said, we're all sort of trying to do that on our samsaric. And so just as we say in the Guru Puja, get to the right page, in the Lam Rim section, and this is the training in the mind of in common with middle capable being, violently tossed amidst waves of karma and delusions. So the destructive emotions, the afflictions, plagued by the many sea monsters of the three kinds of suffering, particularly the all-pervasive suffering of conditionality. I seek your blessing to develop an intense longing to be liberated. That's what we're trying to do, to develop that intense, powerful longing to be liberated from all this wonderful niceness. Yeah. That's 87. So from this infinite and frightening great ocean of existence. And then 88 is having abandoned a mind. So once we do abandon the mind that views this unbearable prison of cyclic existence as a beautiful park, it's not in there. Yeah. Of cyclic existence as a beautiful park, I seek your blessings to hold the three trainings, that's the three higher trainings, ethics, concentration, and wisdom, as the treasure of the Arya's wealth, and thereby to uphold the victory banner of liberation. So in the Lam Rim, they're the two verses that relate to this middle scope, practice. 87 and 88. Okay. So then, you know, with regard to our motivation for engaging, for receiving teachings, especially if we understand the benefits of listening to the teachings, that comes up here, of receiving the, I think I'll skip that and come back to that because we're not up to that yet. Okay. So we've talked about the three principles. So I want to start at the beginning of the text. So in the version that we have, it says, I bow down to the holy lamas. So it's just, sometimes the translation's a bit different. So I bow down to the Venerable Lamas, I bow down to the holy lamas. So here we have the paying of homage. So usually at the beginning of the text, there's a paying of homage. So here we could say equally, Lama Tsong Khapa said, I bow down to the noble Manjushri, right, from whom we received this teaching. But he's making it more extensive. So who is the object that is making prostration? It's the field of merit. So here we have, you know, within, when we do the Guru Puja, we have that vast field of merit from which we receive the maximum amount of merit. So if we're just going to think of one, it's going to be your root guru, spiritual mentor, lama, so forth. So this is what we mean by venerable lamas. So when we're thinking about lama or guru, so the word lama indicates having received a lot of teachings, being very knowledgeable about the Dharma, both scripturally and in practice. And the second part refers to not only having heard that, but put it into practice and gained realizations, putting it into practice in a faultless fashion. Like one of my teachers used to say when I'd say, Lama Zopa Rinpoche said, and I'd go on to quote, what were Rinpoche's exact words? Exact words. Right? So we do. It was good, you know. We used to be like, you go and, you know, had the opportunity to see Lama Zopa Rinpoche. At the beginning, they'd say, make sure you record it. Later on, the actual attendants recorded it and gave you a recording of what Rinpoche said. But when I was one time with Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and he said, have you got your notepad? And I did not have a notepad because, you know, I'd been lining up for this for every day for a couple of weeks. And so at the beginning, you've got everything. And at the end, you're just like, oh, well, maybe I'll get this today or maybe I won't. But anyway, so Rinpoche gave me a notepad to write down his holy words. So we need to listen very precisely. But here he's paying homage to his holy lamas that have that realization through putting it precisely into practice. So also we have this idea of the holy lama being someone of whom there's no one higher, there's no one more important in our life, the most precious one in our life. So this is the name we give to our spiritual master or masters, holy lamas. So there can be the lamas of the various lineages. We say the vast, so around Buddha Maitreya, accumulation around, of the vast tradition, and then around Buddha Manjushri, the wisdom profound lineages. So we have that through, of course, through Lama Atisha, we get the combination of both, but we have, Arya Nagarjuna, Chandrakirti, and so forth. And we follow that lineage down. We follow down from Maitreya Buddha through Asanga and down Lama Atisha and so forth. So when we think about I bow down to the holy or venerable lamas, we're thinking about the lineages of the teachings, authentic traditions, right? Or we can think about our principal teacher, our main teacher, inseparable from Lama Tsong Khapa. So that's quite valid. And then we have Lama Tsong Khapa saying, I'll explain as well as I can the essential meaning of all the conqueror scriptures, the path praised by the excellent conqueror children, the port for the fortunate wishing liberation. So here we're talking about the teachings of the conqueror, all the conqueror's scriptures, which is all the Buddha's teachings, 84,000 teachings of the Buddha, all the sutra and tantra. And the essence, the essential meaning, the essence of the teachings, of the various aspects of sutras, of the various teachings of tantra, the 4 different levels of tantra. And the essence of all of this is what Lama Tsong Khapa is going to explain here. So coming back to this particular text in terms of renunciation, so the 2 levels of renunciation, we can look at the small scope practitioner, their renunciation is of worldly concerns of this life and very much practicing the higher training of ethical conduct, taking refuge, taking vows, and having a disciplined life, which is one of the aspects that gives us our human rebirth, in order to establish, the best possible conditions for a future life. So that already is quite a profound aspiration. So the renunciation, you could say, of this life and looking more towards other lives. But here we're talking about that level of renunciation that is liberation from having any life in cyclic existence. So it's a huge leap to the middle scope, turning away from future lives. And these are taught in the stages for aspiring disciples, as the Buddha taught, according to their disposition, according to, what we're capable of in any point in time. So we could say, in essence, that the Buddha's teachings taught methods for subduing our unruly mind, subduing the destructive emotions, subduing the afflictions, subduing that, and on top, developing all the spiritual qualities. When we get to the great scope, we talk about the perfections and so forth. So this is what's meant here by the essence of all the teachings. And the conqueror refers to having conquered all others. All others is all the afflictions, all the deluded states of mind. It's not having, won the war out there in the world, right? And then the second line, so that's, oh no, sorry, no, the Tibetan is in a different order. The path praised by the excellent conqueror children. So this one, it talks about bodhichitta. So here it is the holy conqueror's offspring or children. So children means you're of that lineage. You're the Buddha's son, daughter. So these are the bodhisattvas. So here we're talking about the great scope. We're talking about cultivating bodhicitta. Exalted is a person in whose continuum in their mind, the wish to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings has arisen. So that person becomes a superior individual because it's superior to one seeking even self-liberation from samsara. So that's the most, you could say, superior mind you could have, the highest aspiration you could have. And then, of course, at that time, when we do generate the mind aspiring for the highest enlightenment, for the benefit of all sentient beings, even generating that thought, a lot of negative karma is destroyed. So every time we say the refuge and bodhicitta prayer, I'm looking at Team Yondra over this side of the room. Every time we say that, just think that a lot of negative karma is destroyed and you become a conqueror's child or one of the conqueror's children, son or daughter of the Buddha. So this is very much mentioned in Shantideva's Bodhisattva's way of life. Through having given rise to this aspiration, no matter where you're born, in terms of, well, it says in the text, it says caste, but no matter, what human existence you have, worldly opportunities you have, nonetheless, no matter what color you are, you're equal in the sense that be equally regarded, having given to this right mind to a bodhisattva. So we can say, we're not yet on those bodhisattva grounds. We haven't yet generated an uncontrived thought of renunciation, let alone an uncontrived, in other words, spontaneous thought of bodhicitta, but we're in the family. We're in the family. We're in the Buddha's family. Big family, we're part of it. Yes, so this is the mind that gives rise to Buddhahood. No matter what practice you engage in, you come closer and closer to the state of omniscience. And then when you sort of set a bodhicitta motivation in the day, no matter what you do, you said it in the morning, no matter what you do throughout the day is done with that bodhicitta motivation. So it becomes, well, maybe not the naughty things, because I don't think you do those with a bodhicitta motivation, but whether virtue you engage in or even neutral activities, such as sleeping, is for the welfare of all sentient beings. So while you're asleep, you're gaining that merit of that bodhicitta. So easy practice at one. And then the port for the fortunate wishing liberation is the correct view. So basically, Lama Tsong Khapa summarizing right here in this verse the three principles of the path. The port, or often we say gateway or entrance for the fortunate ones who desire liberation. So the fortunate ones are us who are engaging in Buddhist teachings, having a fortunate, precious human rebirth, in that we have come into contact with the Buddha's teaching. We're here in a time in where the Buddha's teachings are alive. And even though we can see there's a lot more degeneration of ethics, of the mind, of sense of responsibility regard for others and so forth in the world generally, it actually makes this precious human rebirth even more rare, because not only have we met the teachings, we're in a situation where we are able to put it into practice. Often we focus on what we can't do, but we need to focus on what we are doing and rejoice in what we're doing. We should all be totally blissed out at what we are doing, not thinking, oh, but I haven't blah, and I haven't blah. That just brings you down. Just think how many people in your circle of family, friends, and so forth are doing the same thing. And that will tell you how rare it is just in that small circle of beings. Yeah. So this is the correct view of reality, the wisdom. So desiring liberation. So then we have to look at what it means by liberation. So, of course, we use the word liberation as a sort of freedom and escape, you know, as one of the guys in the prison project wrote to us one time. He said, I followed Lama Zopa's advice, I liberated myself. But then I got caught again and ended up back in prison.
He escaped from prison.
Yes.
Oh.
He does mean he escaped from prison. I liberated myself. Yeah. Yeah. Not that escape. So if you know, for something to release, to have a sense of release, that something has to loosen up. You know, often we have these meditations around the fact that we're so tied up in knots and we have to unwind so much stuff physically, let alone our mental confusion, you know, our mind that needs to be, you know, unwound, released, if you like. So this is what's referred to as that prison of cyclic existence. So we're sort of loosening that, at least weakening that. We want to escape from that. So this is about getting away from the destructive emotions, getting away from the afflictions, and then the negative actions, the negative karma that results from them. Okay. So the karma and delusions, which is the second noble truth, you know, the origins, which then turn the whole wheel of cyclic existence. So it's only removing ourselves from those destructive emotions and the actions that result that we achieve liberation. So I have a friend who's Buddhist, very long-term Buddhist, who was married for a very long time to a reformed alcoholic. Actually, I think she got him to become a reformed alcoholic. Amazing. And she doesn't drink a lot until she's around her friends who drink a lot. It's that sort of, we're all like, if there are particular afflictions that we know are going to be triggered, even though it's an internal thing, by the company we keep, like how much can we either, if we have to keep that company, prepare ourselves for that, prepare strategies around that. Just ask anybody, you know, any reformed alcoholic or whatever, you know, what they did. What the first thing they didn't do was go to the pub. Throw yourself in the deep end of, you know, the most difficult triggers that you have in your life because we're not ready for that yet. So anyway, I'm just sort of, that's a thing that we can look at. In fact, even we take the first vows of, when we take the pranamoksha vows, the individual liberation vows, which are very much pertinent to here, this is what we do. We also say that, you know, not to keep bad company. And bad company isn't people who are naughty or people who are in prison necessarily. You know, I mean, I keep their company, but then I leave. But a lot of them got in there because they kept bad company for too long. But is those who, by virtue of you being around them, is that your mind is in danger of being turned away from the Dharma. But it's by virtue of you being around them. Somebody else might be around and their Dharma conviction might be so strong that there's no way, regardless, that that's going to turn them away from the Dharma. So we have to know who those beings are for ourselves, or what situations those situations are for ourselves. Like, as I like to say, now I've got Rinpoche's practice so installed in my mind, I say, you know, I don't want anything until I go into a shopping centre. And then it's like half price, closing down, only today. It's probably summer sales now, is it? Already? And back to school. So I know. I was so disappointed, you know. I went to Aldi to get something else where they didn't have it. But I thought, I'll look at all the school stuff just in case. And I think I did the same somewhere else. I don't need school stuff. I don't need any. I've got enough pens, papers, folders to last. But you still looked. Yes, it is. Well, fortunately, they didn't have that. Well, not quite a concrete mixer item that I wanted. Because then I realised I only wanted the part that I actually now had, that I got somewhere else. I didn't want the whole thing anyway. So thankfully they didn't have it. I got a dehydrator. I'm very excited. Yeah. Anyway, now you're all going to, yeah, interesting. And now there's grasping at dehydrator. Okay, so we have to remove ourselves from, well, of course, the root cause is that of the ignorance of reality. But until we're able to cut all of them from the root, we need to look at what are our particular toxic emotions, destructive thoughts. In other words, the whole of the Buddha's teachings is examination of our mind, analysis of our mind, and so forth. And so if we want to cut it all by the root, we have to understand just how reality does exist. It's sort of like we work on multiple levels all at once. Okay. And how perceiving reality wrongly, in other words, there's no valid basis for our afflictions. Like they're not on a valid basis. I mean, they are the basis for afflictions. That ignorance is the basis of that, of destructive emotions and the actions that result, and so forth, and whole kit and caboodle. Our state of dissatisfaction. So say, you know, what's the opposite to a state of dissatisfaction? Is a state of contentment that doesn't want pens and paper and all of this, doesn't need, right? Yes, doesn't need, hands off. Doesn't even think about it. Yeah. So then we look at our own destructive, like the destructive emotions at themselves, and see, well, which one's the strongest, you know, and then which causes us most frequently to have an unpeaceful mind, which is what we seek, or disturbed mind. So they're the states of mind we're wanting to abandon, to be rid of, to uproot. And of course, the very root of that is our root ignorance. As it says, the port, the entrance for the fortunate ones desiring liberation. And then going back to the first line, Lama Tsong Khapa says, I will explain as well as I can. So this shows the intense humility of Lama Tsong Khapa. Shows his humility, his, you know, he's a very learned person. I mean, you read the great treatise on the path to enlightenment, particularly that final volume on special insight. Extremely, and then we look at the practices he engaged with, all those mandala offerings and prostrations and establishing monlams, all the statues and monasteries he built and so forth. And it's just like, I'll explain as much as I can, you know, as well as I can. So that humility is also part of that aspect that we seek for in a teacher, not someone who's big-noting themselves. And he could have said, you know, I'm going to explain the subject matter better than anyone's explained it before, or in a different way to others, because he might think, well, I'm just, Shakyamuni Buddha, but he doesn't. It's like, well, as well as I'm able to do, So it shows how Lama Tsong Khapa always took that lower status for himself. And again, that automatically I think of Lama Zopa Rinpoche with His Holiness the Dalai Lama being that, at big teachings, and you look around and Lama Zopa Rinpoche will be one whose head's closest to the ground, his head right down. And then even there's the photo of where His Holiness is holding his head up, holding Lama Zopa's head up for the photo. Yeah. Okay, so then okay, so then the next stanza, whoever are not attached to the pleasures of transient existence, whoever strives to make leisure and fortune worthwhile, whoever are inclined to the path pleasing the conqueror Buddhas, so the great spot, those fortunate ones should listen with a clear mind. Now, the first line, immediately have a qualm, whoever are not attached to the pleasures of transient existence. So this would imply someone who's already generated the genuine renunciation of definite emergence, that who are not attached to the pleasures, not attached to worldly concerns, having turned away from sense pleasures which keep us trapped in samsara. And then, having gained this precious human rebirth, what does he say? This to make leisure and fortune worthwhile. So this is where we talk about the 8 leisures and the 10 fortunes or endowments or opportunities, that we have in this very life. So without going through each and every one, that we have in abundance. Not just that we have in abundance. It's not like we just have a little bit, we have heaps. It's like these are the best conditions that we'll ever have. Not only that, we have worked really hard in past lives for these conditions. We've practiced that ethical conduct purely in the context of having vows that have accumulated the merit. We've made stainless prayers for this very life that we have now, for all these conditions to come together, the leisures and endowments. And we've practiced generosity, not, sort of spontaneous, shall we say, no strings attached generosity. So this is they're the 3 causes for us having this precious human rebirth, sometimes that perfect human rebirth. And the preciousness of this is like with the analogy of precious jewels, more precious than a sky filled with precious jewels and so forth. Wish fulfilling jewels. So this is something taught in I always think of Genie in the Lamp, wish fulfilling jewels. Well, wish fulfilling jewels is not Genie in the Lamp. Wish fulfilling jewels is that they, with the, very, I don't know, expensive jewelry, you can probably make a lot of money in this life. You can gain great wealth of it in this life, but then it's gone, right? So, and yet, with our precious human rebirth, if we take the essence of that to progress, to do, really put in a lot of effort to progress on the path to enlightenment, we're taking that with us. That comes on our mental continuum. And interestingly enough, I've just been reflecting I'm not really a very IT savvy person, but I did think if I'm aspiring for, well, I'm aspiring for Buddhahood, I better get techno savvy, because if you do, your next precious human rebirth is going to be in a techno world, isn't it? I mean, if you think about it, what you think can bypass that and go back to when there's a throwback to more agrarian times. Well, it made me think, it's good to, yes, you are in your mind. Yeah. It won't necessarily be that technology, but keeping up with the, keeping, well, when I think about it, why am I not? Because my mind got stuck somewhere in the 1980s. Or maybe a bit longer, maybe a bit beyond the 80s. But, I mean, I thought, well, you better just, because it's about making your mind flexible. So it's not necessarily about, I have to know that particular technology because it's going to be redundant next week, but to have your mind open to that level of change that you might think doesn't relate to me. So all of a sudden, totally relates to me, right? So I think it's good to look at where our resistances to change are, because everything is in the nature of change. I'm using that as my probably most extreme example this week. But we do it at so many different levels that really to embrace change, to be open to that, because as the Buddha's first and last teachings, everything is impermanent, everything's in the nature of change. And so if I don't get that, then I'm going to stay stuck in my mind. And, my position in my family might reflect that. I have 4 brothers and a sister. So 2 of my brothers are IT experts, right? So, and another one who's not so much the IT expert, but from a young age, he was inventing things. He could have made mega bucks if he'd stayed in the game. He invented video games in the mid-70s. Yeah. Anyway, it wasn't his trajectory either, but I just think their minds, like in that way, I'm back at the technology thing, their minds were far more engaged. And so I would say I did not have the imprints for that. Imprints for artistic, music. Exactly. This is what I'm saying. So I think my brother's capacity and my lack has nothing to do with our upbringing. It has to do with my mind. Anyway, it's good to look. I'm just saying, look at your blind spots.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what I think. Exactly. I don't have to worry about it. I'm not going to be here. Well, you're making aspirations to be here. And if you think about our lamas, that, well, it is true. I was just saying there are the more traditional ones. I do remember Punsog Rinpoche when Geshe Zopa, when he was 13 and went to Sarah, and Geshe Zopa said to him, if you do really well in your exams, I'll get you an iPad for your birthday. And he said, I don't want it. Like, he's a real traditional. He didn't want it because he said there's all these apps you don't use and whatever. I mean, he probably has now for his studies because probably more of it's online than not, whatever. But just that, we all have different dispositions. But yeah, just think, where am I resistant? I tell myself, I'm not what do you say, that quick adopter, adopter, not adapter, quick adopter. I'm not a quick adopter. So we might have to leave it there. I'm looking at the time. I know, time's flown. time went quick.
Just those thoughts. Oh, when I went to this funeral,
Yeah.
they talked about this man. He was a great researcher, and he also shared his knowledge a lot.
Yeah.
And encouraged people around him. But they kept talking about his curiosity.
Yes.
So curiosity.
Curiosity.
Is kind of fundamental thing.
Yes.
They kept saying he never lost it.
Never lost the curiosity.
Right till the day he died.
Yeah.
Always interested.
Can you hear that, Lee?
Curiosity about everything. So
yeah.
even a person, they spoke to him, they were curious
yeah.
about everything they told him.
Yeah.
So I just
curiosity is key, I think. You know, it's the same happened with Moshe Feldenkrais, who I studied as a Feldenkrais practitioner. And when he was coming, like he was palliative, and he just kept living. and people around him said, well, what's keeping you alive? And he said, curiosity. Curiosity was what kept him alive. Because he was fascinated with how we learn. That was his whole thing, how we learn. He trained as a physicist. He brought judo to the West. And then applied this all to his body, and then wow. So the fascination with having curiosity. So keep your mind curious. That's the slogan we're going to adopt for 2025 and beyond. Okay, so on that note, we'll pause. We will dedicate page 8, first 2 verses. Gewadi no dojad Lama Tsong Khapa Roa Chikyang Mahalokan Ne Sahalago Pasho Janchup Sencho Grimpo Shema Ke Panam Ge Kuchi Ge Panyam Pa Me Payang Gong Ne Gondu Pawashu. And then next page, the prayer for the long life of His Holiness Dalai Lama, we'll do in English. Incomparably kind and supreme Tenzin Gyatso, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, may you have a long life and all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And pray for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, peerless teacher, an assembly of the children of the victorious one, Shravakas and Prachika Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands. Please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now, holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings. Through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request, while striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from other living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhichitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. Along like prayer for Tenzin Usul Rinpoche, Lord of Dharma, who in accordance with the various dispositions of those to be subdued, makes clear in the light of your well-spoken advice the sacred Ganden tradition, essence of Buddha's teachings. Foremost and holy Lama, to you, our supreme, we make this prayer of supplication. Lama, please live long. Okay.